Hello, my name is Brittany McIntyre, and I live and work here in Eastern Kentucky. I'm an outreach worker serving and also a peer support specialist serving people experiencing homelessness, especially individuals with co occurring mental health and substance use disorders. So, co occurring means having a mental health diagnosis and substance use diagnosis at the same time. Um, so, people in Eastern Kentucky who are unhoused often find themselves in abandoned trailers, cars, motels, in emergency rooms, and sometimes just outdoors. I'm here today not just as a professional, but as your constituent, advocating for the people who are falling through the cracks in our district. So homelessness in Eastern Kentucky is rising, and it looks different than it does in urban areas. So it's more hidden. People sleep in camps, cars, and like uninhabitable buildings because there are so few shelters in rural counties. Our counties and surrounding counties like Floyd, Pike, Johnson, Letcher County, Knott County face pretty unique barriers. There is extremely limited behavioral health providers. There's high disability rates, low median incomes, there's scarce housing options, and there's high opioid related deaths. When untreated mental illness intersects with addiction and poverty, people fall into a pretty vicious cycle of homelessness, crisis, ER, jail, and back to homelessness in any order. So, your district is paying for this cycle every single day. The economic impact is huge. ERs have become default crisis care providers, serving over 1 million people in 2024, which was a 12% increase from the previous year. No community in the U.S. hasn't had enough permanent housing to meet the demand in 2024, which forces rural counties to rely on motels and extended emergency room stays. So punitive responses like fines and arrests, it just increases the cost and worsens the homelessness problem. Workforce participation also drops when untreated illness prevents employment. Child welfare involvement rises when parents with co-occurring disorders become unhoused. So behind all of that is the human impact. So I'll give you an example. So this is just an anonymous example, but Wayne is a 46-year-old Floyd County, Prestonsburg resident. He lost his job in the coal mines, developed depression, and began using methamphetamine. Without access to treatment, he became homeless, living 2 winters in a row in an abandoned trailer. He was hospitalized twice for psychosis and arrested 8 times for low-level offenses. So, as your report states, as my report states, individuals with behavioral health needs often cycle between homelessness, emergency services, and the criminal and legal system due to a lack of treatment access. So, my example of Wayne is not an exception to this issue. He's the pattern of this issue that continues to perpetuate in Eastern Kentucky today. So what's the solution? So we need state level is specific policy change. We need state level investment in behavioral health stabilization and supportive housing, especially by strengthening the KRS 210 statute here in Kentucky. Right now, KRS 210 authorizes the cabinet to operate mental health programs, but it does not require housing coordination, supportive housing development, cross-system linkage between behavioral health and housing providers. So, in my report also, I explained that KRS 210 states clearly that it does not require coordination with housing agencies, which leaves rural communities without the integrated services needed to stabilize individuals with co-occurring disorders. So what's the solution? Amend KRS 210 to require integrated housing and behavioral health planning, and fund supportive housing and crisis stabilization beds in rural counties. So this approach mirrors Utah's Housing First model, which I've always been a fan of. The Housing First model reduced chronic homelessness by 91% over the course of the program from 2005 to 2015, and it significantly lowered ER visits and jail bookings in Utah. Eastern Kentucky needs a system that stabilizes people first, then supports treatment, not the other way around. With supportive housing being a foundational piece of recovery, it should come first in the recovering journey to stabilize the individual who is more likely to engage in treatment after feeling safe and stable. So what's the ask here? I'm asking legislators in this district to support amendments to KRS 210 and allocate funding for supportive housing and behavioral health stabilization services in Eastern Kentucky. So this would include things like crisis stabilization beds, supportive housing units, integrated case management, and coordination between housing agencies and behavioral health providers. Fill the gap that exists between behavioral health and housing. So this would be a very fiscally responsible amendment to the bill, and also evidence-based. It's also a big need of the community. So you might say, maybe the money doesn't exist. The money, where's it at? Where can we fit it into the budget? So we're already paying for this problem just in the most expensive ways. So ER visits, jail stays, emergency responses cost a lot more than stabilization services. Utah's model actually saved millions of dollars by reducing crisis-driven spending. So you also may say, what if we don't have the infrastructure? Well, we do. Regional mental health centers already exist under the KRS 210. They just simply need to mandate housing coordination and expand funding for services. So you may say, well, housing first won't work here in Kentucky. I disagree. Eastern Kentucky's homelessness is driven by untreated mental illness, addiction, and lack of housing. The exact issues that Housing First addresses. The model is flexible and can be adapted to rural counties. Some ways they can do that is using Medicaid for case management, targeting grant funding for supportive housing, and LIHTC funding for supportive housing. Also, you can prioritize counties that have the highest rates of homelessness and the highest overdose rates. So, is it politically risky? No, it's not a partisan issue. It's about public safety, fiscal responsibility, and the dignity of all humans. Every family, every community, and every district is affected by mental illness and addiction. So I'm here because I see the consequences of the policy gaps every day. Strengthening KRS 210 statute and investing in supportive housing would break the cycle of homelessness, crisis, and incarceration that is costing our districts lives and money. Eastern Kentucky deserves a solution that matches the reality of what people are facing. I hope you'll stand with us and support these reforms so we can restore stability, dignity, housing equity, and opportunities for the people we serve. Thank you for your time.